to those of you in the audience and listening to the recording later, welcome to Path to CitusCon. It is a new live show on Discord. This is episode number 1. The text chat is going to be happening in the hashtag CitusCon channel, specifically in the Path to CitusCon episode 1 EO1 thread. We've got a code of conduct, as you might expect, and there's a code of conduct for this Discord server. But in addition, we tend to follow the CitusCon code of conduct, which you can find at aka.ms/CitusCon-conduct. And my name is Claire Giordano. I'm a Citus open source champion here at Microsoft, and I'm co-chair of the CitusCon, an event for Postgres event, which is virtual and is happening in a couple of weeks. And I'm here with my co-host, Pino DeCandia, who is an engineering manager at Microsoft working on Postgres. And we're super excited to introduce our 2 guests. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Pino.
No. That's all right. Actually, I wanted to ask, do you want to shout out to the producers now?
That's a great point. In the background, Aaron Wislang and Carol Smith are producing the show. Wouldn't be happening without them and all their work behind the scenes. So you can say hello to them on chat or give them any feedback during or afterwards as well. And then I think Teresa Giacomini is also here. Teresa is my co-chair for the bigger CitusCon event happening in a couple of weeks. Cool. All right. So without further ado, let's get started. Simon Willison is here with us to talk about working in public on open source. Hey, Simon. So I just have a few things that I want people to know about you. Obviously, you're a keynote speaker for the Americas live stream for CitusCon happening later in April. And officially, I think people would say you're an independent researcher and developer. When I think of you, I think back, 20 years ago to the fact that you were a co-creator of Django.
Wow. Yeah. Yep. 20 years ago, 19 and a half years ago at this point, I think.
And more recently, you created Dataset, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a few minutes so you can kind of explain to people what that is and why they might care. You're on the PSF board of directors, and most recently, you've been talking a lot about large language models and ChatGPT, and even the new Bing.
Yeah, they're beguiling. I can't pull myself away from them. They're just too fascinating and incredibly distracting.
I have been following you for years online, and one of the things that you've been talking about for a few years is this concept of working in public and the benefits of working in public, and that's part of what inspired us to choose that topic for today. But before we dive in, we should introduce Marco.
And I have the honor of doing that. So first of all, hi, Marco.
Hey, how's it going?
And for those of you that don't know Marco Slot, our second guest today, who is the keynote speaker for the EMEA live stream of CitusCon, an event for Postgres. The EMEA live stream will be happening in Europe on the morning of April 19th. Marco is the lead architect for the Citus open source project. Citus is a Postgres extension that allows you to scale Postgres to multiple nodes. So you can start small with one or a few nodes and scale to many nodes to a large distributed cluster. He's also the creator of the popular pgcron extension. And all of Marco's Citus engine work is done out in the open and public on GitHub in the Citus open source repo.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can pretty much see anything I did in the last few years in GitHub. Yeah, thanks for also the pgcron shout out. That is my sort of that project. It's much simpler than Citus. I spend way less time on it, but it's like funny that these kind of simple pieces of software you build and then just put out there in the open, it can have a huge amount of impact if it just solves a specific problem that people have. So I'm always happy to hear people using pgcron.
So if we want to dive into today's topic, I guess I'll just start with a super open-ended question. Like, what do you both see as the benefits of working in public? Start with the positives.
Okay, so the biggest thing for me is that the work that I do, like I never want to have to solve the same problem twice, ever. That's like the most frustrating thing is when you sit down to solve a problem, you're like, wow, I solved this before and I don't have those. I'm going to have to do it again. I'm going to have to waste my time figuring it out all over again. And a lot of the problems that I solve when I'm engineering are problems that can be captured in some kind of form. Maybe it's a commit message with a commit that updates something. Maybe it's a few notes. Maybe it's just a sketch and an issue description of the approach that I was going to take. And I found that having those out there, just having those in a system massively increases my productivity. And defaulting to putting them in public, partly it's sort of an insurance scheme. You know, I've worked for companies where I did everything in private, and then I left those companies, and I've lost all of that work. You know, I don't get to, and I'm going to have to reinvent things and solve the same problems again that I've already solved. Everything that I do in public that has like an open source license attached to it and it's just out there, I will never have to think about those things ever again. That's a problem that I've solved once and will never have to go back and revisit. And I love that. You know, I feel like the work that I'm doing is constantly adding up to just me having more capabilities and more tools in my tool belt.
So that's a really Simon-centric perspective. Like
it's very selfish. Absolutely.
I kind of expected you to talk about the benefits of sharing your learnings with others and how we can build on top of each other's learnings and how other people benefit when you share your, today I learned.
Again, it's very selfish. So I have this website, my TIL website, which I'll drop a link into the chat. And I just published my 400th note there. And on the one hand, it is for other people, it's so that if somebody else needs to figure out how to copy a table from one SQLite database to another and they do a Google search, they'll land on my site and it'll solve the problem for them. But mainly it's for me. These are the fact that I'm publishing causes me to increase the quality of the notes a little bit so they make more sense to other people. But it also means they make more sense to me when I come back in a year's time and I've forgotten everything. So yeah, I feel like you can actually be very selfish in your sort of motivations and still do all of this stuff in public in a way that benefits other people.
I really like that because I hadn't thought of open source beyond code, documentation, design, and you're actually preserving your thought process so that you can look at it later. And that is a huge part of what we lose over time.
Well, there's this concept that comes up a lot in recent years. I mean, maybe people talked about this 10 years ago and I just missed it and it went right over my head. But the concept of doing something for future Claire, right? Not just present Claire. And I definitely think about that. I mean, I had conversations with people just this week about, you know what? Let's go update that document. So next year when we're planning for CitusCon, we don't have to resolve this problem, right? We'll remember this bug and it will have been addressed.
So I want to hear the same. Sorry, go ahead, Simon.
I was just going to say that actually that's really important. I feel like publishing. You're writing these notes anyway, right? Like we to be productive in our lives, we need to make meticulous notes about things. The cost of publishing them is pretty tiny compared to the effort of putting them together in the first place. And so you may as well default to publishing them so they benefit other people, which benefits you because, you get a reputation as a useful person and you're all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a very incremental cost on top of, or you should be keeping meticulous notes. Why not publish them?
That reputation as a useful person is an interesting concept. So Marco, I'm going to turn to you. Do you think your work in open source gives you a reputation as a useful person?
Well, like I work in a more of a team capacity on Citus, I guess. So I don't know if it would single me out as a useful person. I mean, and if you're kind of just maintaining a very actively used open source repo by yourself, you're mostly just going to get a lot of complaints a lot of the time, to be honest. But no, I do agree with what Simon says. It's like it's good to, especially if you found a good way of doing things. It's good to just put it out there. I mean, it can be on a blog, it can be on GitHub, because I mean, one thing I try to do a lot, especially in writing code, is I feel like code should always sort of the main job of code is to explain the problem. Like it's not so much to like I would say like good code explains the problem and solves it as a side effect. Like you kind of want to structure it and comment on it in a way that future Marco or future team member will look at it and say, okay, this makes sense. I can work with this. But I mean, it's a bit more of a narrow scope to do that within, like, let's say, code comments and code structure of a particular project. But yeah, for me, like a big part of the of working in public is the feedback mechanism. Like it's kind of hard to write good software that's reliable and solves the right problem for people. And if you're kind of working in a sort of proprietary product, I mean, eventually your customers might complain, or maybe you don't get customers and there's no one to complain. But in open source, it can go really quick, right? I have to sometimes that, we push out the new version and then 15 minutes later, someone says, hey, something broke for me. And that's extremely useful. But you also get this constant feedback of like, man, I really wish we could do this on GitHub issues or on our Slack channel. And that feedback really also just helps you do better work. And I mean, there's also a kind of developer experience side to it, which is part selfish and part was kind of promotional, where it's just easier to use stuff that's open source because you don't have to set up a lot of authentication mechanisms and VPNs. It's like you just do a Git clone and you compile and it works. And that the developer experience of open source, I think, is a very important aspect.
Marco, when you earlier said that you get a lot of complaints, I thought you were going to point out that that's difficult, but then you pointed out its value. Does it also have a negative side? Something difficult to deal with?
I'm not sure there's many negatives. I mean, you shouldn't take it personally, I guess. But like, I mean, if many people are complaining about the same thing, then it's a good thing to fix. If one person is complaining about the same thing over and over again, but no one else is complaining about it, I mean, that can, I guess, be a bit annoying. But I mean, most of the time it's just useful, and most people are well intentioned anyway. But yeah, sometimes there's also a challenge of, okay, you get too much feedback, right? And you have to kind of start saying no to 90% that comes in, and then the project becomes more popular, so you get even more feedback, and you need to say even more. You need to say no to 99% of requests. So that can get a little bit difficult sometimes.
I've got a workaround for that, which is kind of fun.
Do?
So my main project dataset, one of the big features it has is a plugin system, so you can write plugins for it. And the joy of plugins is that people can add features to my software without me being involved at all, even if I think those features are a terrible idea. And this actually plays well for me because I come up with features that I think are a terrible idea, and I can still build them. Like I can go and build a plugin that does something kind of ridiculous and silly, because it doesn't harm the core project, because it's a separate thing. And so that I found has been so, like, when people say, how can they contribute to my software? I tell them, write plugins for it. I won't even have to review their pull request. They can work completely independent of me and explore new things. And maybe my software gets a really cool new feature as a result.
Well, that's really interesting because that connects to a capability that Postgres has. Like if you go back to the very first paper that was originally published, when was that? 1985, 86, Marco? About Postgres. One of the primary design constructs in the database was that it be extensible. And so, in fact, there's this ability to create Postgres extensions, and Citus is, in fact, a Postgres extension, and it's enabled all this innovation to flourish that wouldn't have been able to be put into Postgres core, right? It kind of gives people runway to go off and make things happen without having to get them in.
PG Cron is PG Cron is another fantastic example of how well that kind of thing works. Yeah.
Right.
So
yeah.
what about community fragmentation aspect of that. So if you, in particular in a data set, Simon, I wanted to ask you, so if someone goes off and writes a plugin, do they continue to have the conversation in the context of your of data set, or do they end up splintering off? And how do you bring those conversations back together?
So right now, the community is small enough that we have a Discord that we hang out on, and that's not been a problem yet. But also the project is young. Dataset itself is 5 years old now. The plugin system's maybe 4 years old, but it's only in the past year that people have really started building quite elaborate plugins on top of it, which is super exciting. You know, it's the position I've wanted the project to get to. But I feel like there's going to be growing pains going forward that we haven't encountered yet. So right now it works because it's a small enough community that's been okay. I do worry about things like I want to make changes to dataset which could break plugins, and that's fine when I wrote the plugins because I can upgrade them. But now I've got external like volunteer maintainers building their own plugins. I have to think more carefully about that kind of thing. But yeah, I feel like it's a well-trodden path. Like my inspiration was WordPress, where WordPress plugins have been around for 15 years, and I feel that the reason that WordPress has been so successful. But it's a very the design and architecture challenges are really interesting. You know, designing a plugin system that lets people do flexible things without sort of binding your hands in terms of the future of the project itself takes a lot of practice and work. And I feel like I'm figuring out those patterns as I go along, but it's difficult. There's not much guidance out there as to how to design your plugins or extensions model for sort of maximum power and minimum friction.
So what about the Postgres community? How has that been? Obviously, the extensions are massively successful. There are lots of really popular extensions. Was that a problem? I'm fairly new to the Postgres community, so I'd love to know a little bit about the history of extensions and how the community remained avoided fragmentation.
Yeah, I wouldn't know what the first extensions were. I mean, I think the first really major one was PostGIS or PostGIS. Which is the kind of adds geospatial data types and functions to Postgres without changing a line of Postgres code. And it's very interesting. So you can have these polygons like on maps that you store in your database, but you can also then create indexes on spatial indexes effectively because the plugins, the indexing system in Postgres is also very pluggable. I think most places where you can run Postgres, you usually also have PostGIS. But this kind of data type, adding a new data type, that's a very kind of clean interface in Postgres. There are certain other types of extensions. They don't really have a name. I kind of refer to them as deep extensions that really alter the behavior. Citus is one of those, and TimescaleDB, and there's this new graph extension called Age, or I think Agents Graph previously. It's basically a graph database on top of Postgres, and like they go a lot deeper into the extension interfaces that Postgres offers. I think sometimes it happens in the Postgres community where someone wants to add a new feature, how to do it, and what the design should look like. So they just add a function pointer and say, okay, you built your own extension, and do it your way. And that gives an enormous amount of power. Like that, there's nothing like it in any other database that you can just change the planner into something completely different. But that part is also a little less cleanly layered. So it's hard to layer certain extensions that mess with the planner on top of each other. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like you get into also, binary compatibility issues that they mess with the data structures in incompatible ways. But I mean, it hasn't really, become a huge problem yet so far. I mean, most of the time, people use one or two of the deep extensions, but not a big combination. And then there's the vast majority are more like new data types and new functions, and those extensions usually compose really, really nicely.
So when we were brainstorming topics for today's first episode, Postgres extensions was absolutely one of the things we considered. We could spend a whole hour talking about it. And in fact, next week in episode 2, I think we're going to be back here Wednesday, 10 a.m. Pacific time as well, with some different guests. And our topic is something like how to get Postgres ready for the next 100 million users. And I'm sure Postgres extensions will come up in that conversation too. I want to circle us back to working in public for a second. Simon and Marco, you both have talked about some of the benefits of doing it, but what I wanted to drill into, because one of you kind of planted this seed in my mind, what was surprising? What has been surprising about working in public? Has there been anything surprising about working in public?
I think the surprises, they're the nice little surprises when somebody says, "Oh, I really appreciated that that note that you put out, and it's something that you threw out 6 months ago and promptly forgot about, and honestly didn't think anyone would ever read." So that's the real delight of it. It's when somebody says that thing that you wrote helped me solve a problem or was useful to me, and like somebody will come talk to you at a conference or whatever, and that's always delightful, because honestly, I publish so much stuff. Like on any given day, I probably publish 1 or 2 TILs, like half a dozen issues, a bunch of commits. There's a massive volume of it, so I assume that nobody is going to see most of it or any of it, because who's got the time to look at my latest GitHub commits or whatever? And so when people do, that's kind of lovely, because like I said earlier, I do this selfishly. It's mainly for me, but anytime it's valuable to someone else, it's always kind of a treat. It's always delightful to hear that did have a impact in the world beyond just me having my own notes.
Well, the reason you're here is because I've been following you for years and have learned so many different things from you that I finally mustered the courage to introduce myself and invite you to be a keynoter at CitusCon. So yeah, I do. I think oftentimes people do appreciate the work that gets shared publicly, but we're not wired to necessarily express that gratitude or say thank you. So when you do get a compliment, it is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. On GitHub, there's a tab for issues. There's no tab for gratitude or appreciation or compliments or accolades. It's not there. We're all focused on what's wrong and how can we make it better.
Well, there's the star button.
Oh, that's true. There are stars. Yeah, I love it when people star the Citus GitHub repo. But I try not to ask for that too much because it seems so shameless.
But I suppose comments could be nice. But yeah, you were asking, were there any downsides? And
no, I was asking what was surprising.
Oh, what was surprising?
Yeah.
So I think yeah, one of the surprising things about, like, if you just push some software out there, is just a lot of the usage is actually very silent for a long time. Well, just like Simon said, okay, just someone came out of the blue and said, read this message. And the same thing happens with software, where you suddenly realize there's this enormous user that has been doing very interesting thing with the things you built. Like the funniest anecdote we often share is on pgcron. A lot of our team is in Turkey, and supposedly the Turkish government uses pgcron to schedule the street lights for turning on and off.
Amazing.
I don't know the exact mechanics of it, but it seems brilliant. I totally love it. And so those are also always the nice surprises, because they tend to happen quietly. Like for years, turns out your project has been used. I also remember this, I come from this university where we had this professor, Andy Tannenbaum, and he had this operating system called Minix, which before Linux was kind of the main sort of open operating systems that people were using. And he had these long debates with Linux and about the operating system architecture. And I mean, in the end, Linux kind of became much bigger, and Minix kind of became much less important. But then at some point, it turned out that Intel had put Minix in one of their chips. And it was like one of the most widely deployed operating systems in the world. And often these things come like really quietly. You can. It turns out that there can be massive impact of the things you've done in public. So that's like one of the really nice things.
I think one thing I'll say there is that people often ask, like, how can I contribute to open source? And there's this idea that, oh, well, now you need to fork the code base and fix bugs and submit pull requests. Totally, like, forget about that. That's like, there is so much you can do for an open source project that comes way before you're actually like sending in patches and trying to commit code. And one of the most valuable initial things is just tell the people who built the project what you did with it. Because I can guarantee for the vast majority of open source projects, weeks will go by with maybe a bug report or two, but no real evidence that it's being used, because people can take it and use it for free independently. And so if somebody says to me, hey, I use Dataset to build this thing, and honestly, it doesn't matter what this thing is, that will make my day. I will be absolutely thrilled to see evidence that people are engaging and using it. So yeah, just like telling people that you use their stuff is great. Even better than that, write about the thing that you did. If you like tweet a screenshot of something that you've built with my software, again, that's like, that's social proof. It's an endorsement. I can promote that to people, and I get to see what's going on. But so there's very tiny things you can do to support an open source project, just in terms of talking about what you're doing with it, that are way more valuable than you might expect.
About 10 years ago, Josh Burkish published a talk. He gave a talk. I think the title was something like 50 Ways to Love Your Project. And it was about all those non-code ways that people can contribute to open source. And I love the two that you just mentioned. Tell the people what you did with it and write about it, tweet about it. I ended up doing a reprise of Josh's talk at a couple of conferences in the last year, like Fibonacci spirals and, all these ways to contribute to Postgres beyond code. But telling people what you did with it is probably one of my favorite ones, because it helps other prospective users, right? It helps other people who are thinking about using it in that way to learn from your experience. And then it makes the creator's day. I mean, your dog probably got an extra walk that day. Or maybe not. Does that not happen? When you're really excited, do you not take the dog out for a walk? I don't know. It's what I do.
We have a cat. He walks himself.
Marco, what's a two-flight project? Since you were talking about pgcron earlier.
Sorry, a two-flight project?
Yeah. Isn't that how you describe pgcron? No?
Oh, yes, a two-flight project. Oh yeah, you asked me this before. Yes. So I don't know. I used to have. I mean, I don't really travel by plane much anymore, but I used to fly a lot, and then for work, and then. I don't know, that was always the best place for me to write code. It's just sort of disconnected from the internet and people and email and chat. And then, so I guess writing pgcron initially took me like 2 flights probably to the US to get it done. But I mean, yeah, I had an intention there of, it's not part of my day job. And, I kind of really tried to carefully think of, if people are going to rely on this, how, without me doing a lot of work, do I make it as reliable as possible? And that begins with keeping it very simple and small and focused on a specific problem. There's quite a few feature requests which I'm not ignoring. I'm just like weighing them extremely carefully. So for a few years, I didn't add, for example, the ability to schedule jobs in seconds, because it's not something that cron does. And but recently, there were so many people asking for it. It's like, okay, well, this solves a real problem. I'll pay the cost of doing it. Yeah, you also have to be careful that if you sign up for it, like if you put something out there really with the end that people then start relying on, and I mean, you can have the choice of either building a community around this, or being on the hook for it, or kind of abandoning it. But so currently, I'm sort of keeping myself on the hook for it, but keeping it as simple as possible as well.
I feel like what you're describing there that's the hardest problem in software development is prioritization. It's deciding what to build next, deciding what features are worth paying the sort of ongoing maintenance tax, just figuring out, what is the most valuable thing that I could be building. I find that incredibly difficult because I'm independent. I don't have a boss or investors or anything. So there's very little sort of I don't really have a forcing function to help me make those decisions. So I can get to the end of the day and I've built a new thing, which is fine, but it wasn't the thing I intended to do with my time to sort of to reach my larger goals.
So Simon,
Yeah,
how
that
do you
can be a
organize your
hard
day in that
thing.
case? I was going to ask you about that before, just in terms of, you publish week notes, you clearly have a discipline and you have a habit of doing certain things. You explained the motivation before as selfishness, but then there's also this aspect of prioritization. So since you've got to decide across multiple projects, what's your day like? Do you sit down and I don't know, pre-prioritize everything you could potentially do? You do that weekly? I'd like to hear about your
Yes.
habits.
So on a good day, when things are going well, I have a slot between 9 and 9:30 in the morning where I make my plan for the day and I figure out, okay, I try and say I'll go for one big thing and two small things that I want to get achieved. And then I'll check in at the end of the day and see if I did those. And then once a week, I sort of look at my larger goals and try and use that as a thing. That's when things are going well. Past couple of months, things have been going disastrously wrong because every sodding morning, some new AI thing has happened, which distracts me for half an hour and I miss my planning session and so forth. So honestly, there are periods of time when it's all working really well and I'm prioritizing well. And then there are periods of time where it's complete dumb luck if I get something useful achieved by the end of the day. And the week notes are a good cover for that because every week or every 2 weeks I publish a thing with notes on what I've been doing, and it always looks like I've been super productive. But if you actually look at the strategy and say, hang on a second, were those things that he wrote about the things that were the things he most wanted to get done or needed to get done? They often aren't. So yeah, it's an ongoing struggle for me. And I've learned that sometimes I do this stuff well and sometimes I don't. And that seems to be a sort of like cycle that I can't break out of. So, as long as I don't have 6 months of complete sort of productive unproductivity, then I'll be okay. But yeah, at the moment, I really need to bust away from AI research world and get the next alpha of the Dataset 1.0 release out. That's been top of my priority list for like a week and a half. And I still need to push forward and get it done.
Are you saying that it's distracting when Elon Musk tweets out a link to a blog post that you've written?
It was a bit distracting that day. Yeah, that was a few weeks ago. I wrote a story about Bing, when Bing had just launched and it was going completely off the rails and, threatening people and blackmailing people and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, so I wrote a blog entry about what had been happening, and Elon Musk tweeted a link to my blog entry and I got 1 million readers in the next 24 hours because it was 2 days after he'd tweaked the Twitter algorithm so that everything he said was shown to everybody. So it was all, that was that. Yeah. And that was kicked up. That was 4 weeks ago. And I've been distracted by AI stuff ever since because stuff just keeps on building on top of that. And yeah, it's on the one hand, it's fascinating. But on the other hand, it is definitely delaying my ability to get a whole bunch of stuff done that I wanted to get done.
Okay, I want to circle back to working in public again and ask a different question. To each of you, Marco and Simon, what do you think makes engineers who are new to working in public? I mean, maybe they're either fresh out of college or maybe they've been working in the proprietary context for a number of years. What makes them uncomfortable with working in public on open source?
I can speak for myself here, actually. The biggest one is when I'm employed, I feel like the work I'm doing is private to that company. And so I've had periods of my career where I've done very little stuff in public because I'm working for an organization who pays for my time and they pay for my code. And I signed a thing when I signed up that they had the intellectual property and so forth. And that really helped me back. And then there was a point a few years ago where I realized, hang on a second, I am allowed to work on things on weekends and stuff. I don't have to stick as hard. And also, these companies will never say, approve it with your manager. And the vast majority of managers, you say, hey, I want to do this thing, they'll say yes, because why would they say no? So for me, I think it's partly because I'm a habitual rule follower. I sort of stifled myself by just going too close to the feeling that, no, my employer should get all of my intellectual output. And when I relaxed that, I was way happier and I was way more productive.
Makes sense. Marco, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it partly depends on the culture of the company and uh, how you experience that. But so, for example, a long time ago, I worked for Amazon, and they had a very, I wouldn't say anti-open source policy, but they like using open source but not contributing. There was a time when if you wanted to contribute to open source, you had to ask VP approval. I mean, that has radically changed at Amazon, but like Microsoft has a little bit more of a, well, I mean, the new Microsoft, let's say, in the past few years, um, has a very pro open source policy, but not everyone necessarily feels comfortable making the decision that say, oh, I wrote some useful code and I'm going to push it out there on GitHub. Like, what if someone somewhere in the company will disagree with that? But actually, in practice, it's often quite. I mean, if it concerns high stakes software and say that customers are paying a lot of money for it, is obviously not a good idea. But the company is very open to it, and it's not hard to get approval. And for many things, you don't really need to ask, even like Microsoft actually encourages it. So yeah, I mean, it really depends a bit of the company, and also on how you've experienced the company so far. Is it like in your team, in your organization, a common practice to just put stuff on or GitHub or work on other projects? I think in our immediate teams, like it's pretty common. You see a bug in, let's say, PG Bouncer, you go and fix the bug. Like that's, you're not going to ask anyone, should I ask permission to fix this bug? But I don't know if that's the case for all teams at Microsoft. Probably not. I mean, I think they could, but I don't think they necessarily feel comfortable doing that.
I do have a suggestion for things to write about that I feel are safe no matter what. And I just dropped a link into the chat to this, but basically TILs, this idea of writing about things that you have learned, I feel is the sort of lowest risk form of online publishing that there is, because the great thing about saying, today I learned how to do a for loop in Bash or whatever, is that you're setting expectations up front. This will not, you're not going to rock somebody's world and give them new insight. This is just, I learned to do this thing today and I'm writing about it. And if that's useful to you, then fine. If it's not useful to you, then that's okay. This wasn't for you. And so I started publishing those myself a few years ago, and I love it. It's so liberating because I don't get that writer's block anymore. I'm like, wow, do I really have something unique and interesting to say about this topic? You're like, no, I just figured out for loops in Bash. I'm going to write up 2 paragraphs of text and a sample of code, and I'm going to publish it, and I'm going to move on. And that, I love that. And I feel like if I was working for a company with very stringent sort of, no, you can't like release code and things, I'd still feel okay writing about things I'd learned. You know, that feels like a very safe category of notes to be making and sharing with the world. And then the other thing is, and I've set myself a rule that anytime I do a project, the price for doing that project is I have to write about it. And this is good for me because like I said earlier, I'm very easily distracted, and I will I can get to the end of the day and I had an idea for a project and I built it, and that wasn't on my list. But at least now I have to pay for it, and the payment is I have to write it up. And the write-up can be literally like a README in a GitHub repo with just explaining what the thing is in 4 paragraphs of text, and then always add screenshots. I feel like anything you build, you should take a screenshot, because the code won't work in 10 years' time, but the screenshot will last forever. So I'm a huge fan of screenshotting your work as a way to illustrate it. But yeah, I feel like if that's all you ever do online is anytime you learn something, you write up notes about what you learned, and anytime you do a project, you build something, you put up a quick post saying what it was you built and adding a screenshot, that will put you in the top 1% of internet users in terms of sort of quantity of content that you're producing. And it's great content, and none of it is stuff which I feel like it's very low risk. Like if you put out a blog post saying, hey, this is the way agile should be done, lots of horrible people are going to tell you that you're wrong about it. If you put out a blog post saying, I figured out for loops in Bash, I kind of feel like it's a waste of their time for people to be super critical of that.
Simon, you make
Well,
it
thanks
sound
for
so easy. Could I just ask how much time does that take you? Each of those examples you said sort of 2 paragraphs, and I learned on the TIL
So
and the
I've been
README.
writing, so I've been writing online for 20 years, and so I'm very fast at it. So a TIL post will take me between 5 and 20 minutes generally. And that's partly as well because anytime I'm figuring something out, I'm actually making notes as I go along. I use GitHub issues for this. I've got public issues in public repos. I also have a private repo called Notes, which I just use for when I'm figuring something out. And so often when I get to a write-up, it's literally copying and pasting Markdown from my issue notes into a TIL document and hitting go. So a lot of the time, I've kind of written the notes already. The public write-up is just cleaning it up a tiny bit and adding a little bit of extra context. But yeah, I feel like for the vast majority of people, it's not going to take 5 to 15 minutes at first because you've got to get into the swing of it and find your voice and sort of learn how to productively write. But over time, it just keeps on getting faster. And these are crucial skills. When you talk about becoming a senior engineer, the path to a senior engineer, I think, is through written communication. Like that's the difference between seniors and juniors. The seniors are better at communicating about their work. So developing writing skills is a crucial professional skill anyway.
So one of
yeah,
the other
totally agree.
things. Oh, you go.
And thanks for writing up about for loops in Bash because it's one of those things that I have to Google every single time. Along with for loops in PL PGSQL, that one I also cannot remember. Do you have a till on that? That would be great.
I have to admit, for loops in Bash, I will never write one ever again because ChatGPT writes my Bash scripts for me. So I'm just like, hey, write a script that loops through every file in this repo, in this folder, runs ffmpeg to extract some frames and outputs them, and it does it. And so I no longer feel like I need to dedicate even a corner of my brain to thinking about Bash because ChatGPT knows all of the Bash that I'll ever need to know.
So this brings up a topic for me. Marco earlier talked about writing code on flights and not flying as much these days. Now we touched on ChatGPT. I wanted to ask about changes in working in public, working on open source in the last 5 years, both technological changes and cultural changes. What comes first to mind? And maybe Marco, I'll go to you first if that's okay.
Yeah, obviously the ChatGPT and AI is going to constitute a huge change. I've used Vim and Bash for most of my career, but I'm starting to think, I should probably be using VS Code because that's kind of where all the good integrations will be happening for things like Copilot. So that's for me personally going to be a big change. I mean, less technically, I guess a big change is that large organizations, like both software, like tech companies, but also just large enterprises, are kind of massively embracing open source, both in terms of usage, but also in terms of contribution.
Are you cutting out just for me or for everybody?
Yeah, that cut out for me.
Uh-oh. Yeah, you're cutting out, Marco. I don't know why. Okay, well, try again, and then we'll circle back to you if it doesn't work this time. Yeah, it's still not working. Okay, I'm going to jump in and say that one of the changes I've observed is more of a long-term change. If we go back to when I first started in my career, the way people wrote was a little bit different. There was almost an expectation that their audience, whether it was a paper they were writing or just a lengthy email, that people would read every word. That may not have been true, but the way they wrote felt like that, right? There were these long, chunky paragraphs, and maybe things were written at the 16th grade level or something like that. And I know that when I advise people about how to blog and when I write my own stuff now, I think about scannability, browsability. I assume people are not going to read the whole thing. I assume they might jump to the screenshot, right? Like just read a couple of the section headlines and then go to the screenshot and read the caption underneath that. And so at least, when I think about writing for people, I think about the fact that they're busy and how to make it easier for them to digest and to scan. And I didn't used to think about that 20 years ago. So
Yeah, that's there's definitely something very important. I mean, that's part of why you want to write a lot, is that the more you write, the more you develop those instincts for what's actually going to work. And yeah, I had a sort of moment of crisis professionally a few years ago when I'd gone into the habit of writing these enormously like detailed documents about project proposals and stuff. And then I kind of had a hunch that maybe nobody was reading them, and I started polling around and I couldn't find anyone who'd read these documents. And yeah, it made me rethink and think, okay, actually, like screenshots and like illustrating things more, animated demos. I love having a live demo. Like I feel like a quick live prototype of an idea speaks 1,000 like text documents, because the moment people start playing with it, they can have a much richer conversation about it. Another thing something I found, getting back to the sort of the ChatGPT AI side of things, a realization I had the other day is that there will never be documentation that is better in quality than what I can do with ChatGPT and tools like that, provided they have the underlying knowledge. My favorite example is FFmpeg, where I did this project the other day where I had a video and I wanted to spit out every 10 seconds, I wanted a JPEG frame of that video. It was a video of a thermometer over time, and I wanted to do OCR on it to extract out the readings. And so how do you use FFmpeg to spit out one JPEG for every 10 seconds? I cannot tell you that, but I have done it because I said to ChatGPT, use FFmpeg to spit out a JPEG every 10 seconds. And it gave me this incomprehensible sort of set of DSLs and scripts and all of this stuff, which just worked. And I cannot imagine FFmpeg documentation that would be good enough that it would answer that question for me as quickly as a chatbot that has been trained on that documentation. And so on the one hand, it's weird, like there's this new world we live in where a chatbot provides better documentation than the best possible crafted documentation. But it also speaks to skills we need to develop as writers. We need to almost write our documentation so that chatbots can interpret it correctly and accurately to help answer people's questions. And then as users of this stuff, it's the skill that we need to develop is getting really good at sort of getting these language models to spit out the right information for us to help us solve problems. Spot all of the times that it makes stuff up, which is a huge problem, but just lose that fear. I'm no longer afraid of FFmpeg because I know that something can show me how to use it. Whereas previously, I very rarely used it because it's a notoriously complicated piece of software.
So, as I was preparing, I'm going to pivot from the how have things changed back to the working in public thing again. I reached out to Scott Hanselman last night, and he says hello, by the way, Simon.
Hey.
And one of the questions he suggested I ask, and actually somebody, Olaf on Mastodon suggested I ask something very similar, is as you work in public, how do you stay positive in the face of assholes? Like, right? There are critics out there on the internet. There are haters. There are complainers. How do you stay positive when faced with that? Simon?
I think so part of it is that you develop a very thick skin. You know, if you're online for 20 years, you get to the point where somebody's mean to you, and I kind of think they're probably in their early 20s. You know, they wouldn't be that overconfident and mean if they had actual like real like life experience. So that helps me to a certain extent. I'm quite good, but also, and yeah, I think it's also a lot of it's about self-confidence. Like I am confident enough now that I know my stuff, that if somebody says, no, you're clearly an idiot because you got this wrong, I'll be like, yeah, but I'm better at Django than you are. You know, so that helps me a lot. But it's very much, it comes down to a personality thing as well. You know, I think if you want to really expose yourself on the internet in this kind of way, it does help to have quite a robust ego, you know, and to have that sort of like confidence in your own abilities. Because yeah, people can knock you down, and they will, and if they succeed, it's miserable.
And to put it in context, does it happen much? I mean, I feel like people have become more aware of the consequences that even words can have. Is it getting better? Does it still happen?
Maybe it is getting better. Yeah, maybe.
Oh, it still happens.
Well,
At least I see it. Like, I share information on Reddit because there's, I espouse the philosophy of meet developers where they are, right? And so when Marco writes some brand new, brilliant Citus-related blog post that I want Postgres users to see, right, in case it's useful to them, I will share it on Reddit. And yeah, a lot of times comments are supportive and positive, but yeah, sometimes they're definitely not.
I mean, also, I'm in the most privileged position you can be. I'm white, male. I don't have any of the, and there are all sorts of aspects of like sexism and racism and stuff that I just don't see. So it's a lot easier, I think, in that respect.
Marco,
are you back?
Yeah, let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Perfect.
you
So
want to take a crack
Hear me?
at that question too?
yeah, how do you stay positive in the face of critics on the internet? Has that been an issue for you?
Well, I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter and those kind of things, but the main thing for me is just like focus on what you're doing and like believe in what you're doing. It's like if someone comes and sort of criticizes your project, it's like, I've already thought about this much more, and I kind of know we're doing the right thing, or that we're just working within the constraints that we've had. So it doesn't really bother me in that case, but yeah, just probably like Simon, I'm also not in a position where it's like I'm also in this kind of privileged position, I guess. So I probably also see less of it.
Now, what about the perspective of maybe junior developers or people that are new to open source? And some people in the open source community have reputations for being harsh and quick to critique a new piece of code or an idea. How?
Yeah, I think the pg-SQL hackers list is kind of quite quite interesting in that, but it's very it has a particular style, but it's not. It can be very critical of patches and designs, but it's kind of for, in some sense, the good cause of making Postgres as good as possible. But it's never on the person. It's just like always critiquing code. But it can be very tough for a new person to come in and say, "Oh, I have this nice patch," and then it kind of gets criticized, and that can be a little bit tough.
Speaking of junior engineers, I went back and did a search on Twitter, Simon, for all the instances where you tweeted about working in public. And there is something that you tweeted back in July of 2021, where you said,
okay.
You said, if you want to stand out from other candidates, having even one piece of writing or published piece of code that shows something you've built is a great way to do that. So would you still agree with that? And do you still offer that advice?
100%. So I do mentoring for code boot camps occasionally. And yeah, one of the things because in these boot camps, like often the students, they'll have a final project that they do and they'll put that up on GitHub. And I always tell them, put up screenshots in your README, because the people evaluating these things are not going to click on the demo link, and the demo will be broken in 6 months anyway, because that's just what happens. So, but if your README has like multiple paragraphs of text with interspersed screenshots and all of that kind of thing, that right there will be your resume for the next 3 years, and it'll work incredibly well. Because when I've been interviewing candidates for work, most candidates don't have. And inevitably, you're gonna cyber stalk your candidates a little bit. You're gonna check and see if they've got a GitHub repository and looked at their LinkedIn and that kind of stuff. In the vast majority of candidates, you won't find anything that helps you answer the question, can this person do the job? When you stumble across a candidate who's got one project on GitHub with some screenshots that shows that they can code, now I can skip the FizzBuzz interview question, because I've seen their work. I've seen that they can do that. And if they've got a blog entry from 5 years ago with 6 paragraphs discussing the internals of React or something, they're now, in my mind, an expert on this one subject. So yeah, if you want to stand, if there are 100 people applying for a job and you're the only one with a blog and your blog hasn't been updated in 5 years and it has one article on it and a screenshot of something, that's still a leg up. That still makes you stand out from the crowd.
Marco, do you cyberstalk your candidates when you're talking to them?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, it's nice to just review, basically do a code review before you work with someone rather than after hiring them. But yeah, no, it definitely is a leg up. Like if you have some great projects on GitHub or a very technical blog, yeah, I mean it helps. It's much more. I mean, the resume format is like I always remember that one of the most senior and sort of best engineers I've ever worked with before he got into software in like during the .com bubble, he was a forest firefighter. And I was like, so it doesn't really. I mean, your background matters a little bit, but it's if you can display your skill, it's just 100% better than anything else.
So before we wrap today, I wanted to give each of you a chance to talk a little bit about your upcoming keynote. Now, I don't know if you've written your slides yet and if you're ready, but Simon, the title of your keynote at CitusCon, which is on Tuesday the 18th at 9:00 Pacific time, live streamed, virtual, is Big Opportunities in Small Data. And I just thought that the backstory to why you're giving that talk and why you think it matters might be interesting for people to hear about.
Sure. So this is something. So my day job, and I say job, I'm self-employed, so it's the thing I try to spend most of my time on, is building this open source project called Dataset. But really, the theme is this is tools for data journalism specifically. So I have a bit of a journalism background. I've worked at a couple of newspapers. Django came out of a newspaper 20 years ago. And data journalism is the bit of journalism, I think it's the most interesting thing in the world, right? It's where you work with journalists to try and tell stories with data. And, anytime you see an infographic in a newspaper, anytime you see a chart or a map or something, somebody went out and collected the data for that. That's a data-driven story. And when I worked at the Guardian newspaper in London, like 13, 14 years ago, we realized that there was a reporter at the Guardian called Simon Rogers, he was the data expert. He knew who to call at which government department to get data on any story that you wanted. And then he had all of these meticulous spreadsheets that he kept on a hard drive under his desk. And we got talking, we're like, we should do something with these meticulous spreadsheets about the world. So we ended up starting a blog. We started a thing called the Guardian Data Blog. And the idea was to publish the data behind the stories. And we ended up doing that just using Google Sheets because Google Sheets was free. And, and it worked. And you could put data in it and people could copy that data back out again. But I always felt like there should be a more effective way of publishing data, like a way of putting data online so people can browse and explore it, but also do API integrations with it and export it as different formats and all of that kind of stuff. And so that was the initial idea for Dataset. It's a Python web application for publishing data online. And it's built on top of SQLite because SQLite is tiny and fast, and you can actually package a database with your underlying code when you deploy it, so you don't have to think about even running a separate database server. And this led me to this whole world of small data, where I realized that there's been lots of fuss in the industry in the past sort of 5 to 10 years about big data, which is measured in petabytes and you need a giant data warehouse for. But actually, for the vast majority of people and organizations, what matters is the small data. It's the data that fits on a USB stick. It's like if you have, as an individual, I care about things like my blood sugar levels over time and my step count and my tweets and emails and so on. As an organization, maybe I want to know who my customers are, which is probably like 50,000 rows of data. It's absolutely tiny. And there's this space where I don't feel like people are investing enough effort in building these tools for small data. It shocks me that Microsoft Access has been kind of frozen in time for the past 20 years when it should be one of the most powerful pieces of software in the Office suite. So I've been looking at small data, building tools for that, thinking about it from a sort of data reporting and journalism point of view, and then watching how all of these governments are now releasing open data through these open data portals. So name a city in the United States, it probably has a data portal with CSV files full of trees and parking meters and all sorts of things like that. And it's kind of just sat there because the tooling isn't good enough for regular individuals and, reporters, journalists who I'm building for to take that data and turn it into stories. So yeah, I feel like there's a huge opportunity there. It's like I would like to use Postgres for this stuff more than I do. And so part of my keynote is going to be talking about the ways I've been solving these problems outside of the Postgres ecosystem. And then I also want to tie it into Postgres by thinking about, I was trying to inspire things that Postgres could do better, or the Postgres community could build that would make it even more applicable to solving these much sort of smaller problems.
Well, you just answered my question, which is what does this small data talk based rooted in data set and SQLite have to do with Postgres? And there's the answer. So hopefully people will tune in for that. Obviously, it'll be recorded online after the fact, but we'd love for people to join live too and ask you questions. Okay, Marco, your keynote for the EMEA live stream on Wednesday, April 19th at 9:00 Central European Summer Time is the distributed Postgres problem and how Citus solves it. So in a nutshell,
yeah,
what's that about?
and I kind of will update it in my slide to how Citus sometimes solves it, because it's actually sort of not an entirely solvable problem. So I want to talk a bit about, there's kind of different implementations appearing for distributed Postgres, but it's also been this thing that's, people have dreamed of for many years, but it seems to never quite happen. And I want to talk a bit about like what's the technical problem behind it? Why hasn't someone come in and like submitted a patch to Postgres and now it's distributed? There's new implementations appearing of like distributed implementations of Postgres, but in my mind, fundamentally, if you spread data across many machines, the first thing that happens, everything gets slow, because now you have to go to a different machine to get the data. So it's no longer nicely compacted into one place. And this is a very important thing to understand because Postgres is kind of a relational database. So there are a lot of relationships within the data. If all those relationships start spanning over a network, distribution doesn't help very much. So it's worth understanding that problem and then seeing, well, when does it help? Like, when does distribution make a lot of sense for what kind of applications and what kind of patterns do they use to get there? So that's what I'm going to talk about.
Awesome. We are a little bit over time, not that we're set in stone to end at the top of the hour. Pino, are there more questions that we should have asked? Are there more things you wanted us to cover?
Not for me. I think we covered everything I thought of. But I want to say thank you to our guests. This was really interesting.
Yes, Simon and Marco, I have been fans of your work, both of you, for quite a number of years now. And totally an honor to have you be the first guests for Pino and I here on Path to CitusCon. So thank you. And again, big shout out to Aaron and Carol in the background, without whom, this thing wouldn't even have happened today. And to everybody who came in the audience, who participated in the chat and joined us and tweeted about this and let their friends know. Really appreciate your support.
And Claire, do we have another event coming up?
We do. So next Wednesday, April 12th, same time of day, 10:00 a.m. Pacific time. Which is a nice time slot for those of you in Europe, because hopefully it's like right before or right after dinner. Doesn't work for my friends in New Zealand, unfortunately. But we have a number of guests. Melanie Plejman will be here, Samai Sharma, Abdullah Usterner, whose last name I probably mispronounced, and Barak Y will be here also. And the topic is, again, how to get Postgres ready for the next 11 million users. And so we've got some people with who work on Postgres open source amongst that group, and others who work on Citus open source. And we thought that would make an interesting discussion too. I think somebody could probably drop the calendar invite in the chat for that episode too, in case any of you want to put it on your calendars. I think it's aka.ms/path to CitusCon -EPO2-cal or something like that. Anyway, Simon, Marco, thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Yeah, Sam, it's been great, and thanks everyone in the audience for tuning in. Yeah, hope we get more of these for next year's CitusCon. It was very cool.
And Pino, I love collaborating with you. This is cool.
Same here. I had a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to doing it again.
All right. See you next Wednesday, everybody. And Marco and Pino, we'll see you at CitusCon on the 18th and 19th.
Can't wait.
Yeah, see you at CitusCon.
Right. That's a wrap.
Bye, everyone.
Oh, cool. Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.